Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be taking a look at marketing attribution and maximizing your ROI. Today, I am here with Maya.
All
Uh,
right.
Thanks for joining us today, Mo. Just some housekeeping here. Please comment your questions. I'll be monitoring the chat as we go through. And I look forward to answering some of your questions along with Mo today. If you have any issues or anything like that, feel free to comment as well, and we're happy to help. And we look forward to chatting about this as well. I hope everybody's doing well today. So I'll get started off with the very first question to you, Mo. Can you explain what marketing attribution is and why it's so challenging for people to achieve accurate attribution?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Let me actually share my screen, and I'll walk you through kind of what attribution is. So, attribution, the way that we look at it, is essentially the process of understanding how the marketing effort is leading to conversion. So, what sort of ads are you running? What sort of campaigns are you throwing out there? What channel marketing are you doing? That's leading users to visit your website and ultimately convert and perform the events that you want them to do. And the challenge really happens to be around doing multi-touch attribution and doing it in a glass box way. So you'll see a lot of other attribution providers out there that have their own sort of internally defined attribution model that you don't really get access to. It's kind of a lot of what you see with tools like Google Analytics, where you don't really understand what's happening beneath the surface around what's actually leading to an attributed conversion or attributed revenue and so on. So Snowplow really makes the effort to make that all visible to you. And not only is it visible, but you have multi-touch attribution, giving you the flexibility to implement different types of attribution models as well, so that you can fine tune and really understand what's seriously driving conversions and what's not.
And Mo, you have a slide, I believe, that shows kind of the different attribution models that Snowplow has. Do you mind sharing your screen so that we can see that?
Yeah. So, do you see my screen here as well?
No, not at the moment.
Okay. So let me just reshare. Awesome. So, not sure if my screen is sharing now.
Yeah, it is. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so this kind of lays out the different types of attribution models that Snowplow has to offer. And there's more as well, but these are the main core ones that most folks are looking to use. So you can see we have first touch attribution, which attributes the conversion to the first touch point the user touches on in a multi-series touch point that ultimately leads to conversion. In the second model, it's last touch. So really the last touch is what's getting the attribution credit. Positional base, we're distributing the attribution credit out in such a fashion. And linear, we're distributing it out in a more equivalent fashion. So really different ways to go ahead and digest that, sort of like the user interaction data as to what campaigns they're interacting with, what channels they're interacting with, and ultimately distributing the credit in a way that you see to be most fair, that leads to understanding how our users are converting, right?
Right, right. And so how does this differentiate from like a, Google Analytics? Like I'm using Google Analytics. There's different attribution, models that you can create from the data in Google Analytics. How does this differentiate?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and it's something that I hear so often in our industry, especially around solving for attribution from a data-led perspective. And really, the issue and challenge with Google Analytics tends to be they do help with attribution, but they completely black box it. So what that means is you don't see the modeling that's happening underneath their surface. So they'll tell you, hey, we're attributing X amount of conversions to this campaign, but you have no idea as to how they're doing that conversion. So that's the first piece. That's really a differentiator. And the second is a lot of times the way that they're capturing data, it is in a third party way. So they're not really, there's a ton of data loss and data gaps as it comes to Google Analytics data. And that leads to, from what we've seen, a lot of wonky results as it comes to viewing the attribution results as well.
And that kind of comes from like browsers like blocking certain amounts of traffic and things of that nature, whereas Snowplow kind of is able to get around some of that. Maybe you can touch on that.
Yeah. So Snowplow truly is a first-party tracking solution. So we solve that in essentially two ways. One is we launch what we call an ID service, and that's able to do some IP matching to essentially ensure that we're truly tracking users that are visiting your site in a first-party way. So we're assigning first-party cookies. Those cookies last up to 400 days if they're server set. And within those 400 days, even if the user is anonymous, we'll be able to continue to understand the different events that they're performing and link their event history together, which allows us to link the different touch points they're interacting with together really effectively in the warehouse. And this is opposed to Google Analytics, where they a lot of times are getting blocked by Safari and other browsers that are labeling them as a third-party tracking solution. And a lot of times, what that means is sometimes they're tracking the data, sometimes they're not being able to really track and assign cookies to users effectively. And a lot of times, you'll end up having duplicate users in the warehouse because they're assigning multiple cookies to the same user, and that user can't be stitched together. And that really is an attribution. It leads to a lot of faults as it comes to doing attribution with Google Analytics because you're not getting the full history of what the user is doing. And because of that, you can't really give credit to conversions effectively.
Awesome. So, we have like the 4 attribution models here that kind of are a way for us to assist you and get you off the ground running. Hypothetically, though, it's going into the warehouse, going to the lake house. You could create any type of attribution model you want, a U-shaped, anything of that nature, whatever attribution model you wanted to coordinate. Cool.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And part of what really leads our existing clients and customers to success at Snowplow is we do offer modeling support as well. So all of the attribution models that you see here come with a ton of SQL that we built out and maintain and sustain over long term. So you can always be guaranteed that the modeling that's happening underneath the surface here to make these sort of attribution models work, because we're putting a lot of time and effort in maintaining them. But as you said, like if you're looking to do attribution in different ways or slightly different ways, or introduce your own sort of like spin to the models, we're happy to also help you with that modeling effort to ensure that we're helping you to do attribution in the way that you see best.
So like that foundational infrastructure is really, really important. Like, can you talk through what that infrastructure looks like? How does Snowplow differentiate itself, and how are we setting them up for success and to achieve proper attribution? Like Snowplow has a very different, infrastructure than other providers. So can you talk through that a little bit in that model?
Yeah, of course. So let me actually share another screen here. So this is just a mirror diagram that showcases really what the Snowplow infrastructure model looks like to ensure that we can do attribution correctly. So you can see at the top the flow of how we're solving for data capture and ultimately attribution and many other things with the Snowplow model. So really the phase 1 approach is data orchestration, right? So in this layer, what you're doing is, as a PM, as a marketer, as a data strategist, you're defining where you're tracking events, how you're tracking events against your site, what you're labeling as conversion. And in an attribution context, tracking conversions becomes incredibly important, because to be able to understand what to give conversion credit to, we need to first understand what conversion even means. Is it a purchase? Is it a feature interaction? Is it a form submission? Whatever that event is, needs to be orchestrated properly within a centralized UI, and we provide that sort of support within the Snowplow domain.
Making sure everybody's on the same page, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
And that you're setting up like the strategy up front.
Exactly. You're setting up the attribution strategy up front to go ahead and define what attribution, what conversion means, so that we can attribute conversion correctly. And after you do that orchestration and set up correctly in the beginning, we'll go ahead and, of course, track those events with our various different SDKs. Then you'll deploy our pipeline that goes ahead and take those events, sends it through our pipeline for it to be processed. And processing involves validation and enrichment, which ensures that we're looking at the data correctly, we're processing the data correctly, and ultimately we're real-time loading the data into the warehouse correctly as well. So now, just as an overview, you've defined your attribution rules and how you're doing attribution up front. You defined your conversion events. You did the actual work to do the tracking. And then you rely on our pipeline and our real-time uploader to get the data, the attribution and the conversion data into the warehouse. And we support any of the major warehouses like Databricks, Snowflake, Redshift, and BigQuery. Now, once the data is within the warehouse, it's truly centralized. It comes with all the first-party IDs that I mentioned because Snowplow is a first-party solution. And we do a few things in the warehouse to help with attribution. So the first piece is really making sense of just regular user interaction data. So creating things like a users table, creating things like an ID table, understanding what pages users are interacting with, how many views that they're performing, and also doing sessionization logic to stitch together different views, different link clicks together to say, hey, within a single session, the user ultimately visited all these different web pages, and then they finally converted. So that's what's happening with our unified model. And then the attribution model, what it does is it takes that users table, the ID table, the pages interactions, and all that sort of granular event data as to what the user is doing on the site. And then it creates a few tables to help you digest how we're giving attribution credit and doing MTA. So first of all, it's going to create a pathways to conversions table. This lays out the different kind of campaigns and channels the user ultimately interacts with before they convert. Typically, users aren't just clicking into a single campaign or a single ad and converting. They're visiting your site from an ad. They're visiting your site through a campaign. They're visiting through multiple campaigns. And then finally, they're converting, right? So ultimately, most users take a multi-touch approach to convert.
Yeah, no journey is linear by any means.
Yeah. So our attribution model takes into account all of that, and then it applies your various different MTA models. So whether you're doing first touch linear or any custom attribution modeling that you develop with us, and then we finally build a attributed conversions and attributed revenue table that says, hey, these are the different attribution models. This is how we're giving conversion credit to each of the different campaigns and channels and advertising that you're running. And this is what the attributed revenue looks like. Additionally, there's a ton of other metrics that we're generating, things like ROS, that tell you, hey, based off of the spend that you're putting into any specific campaign or advertising, this is the return on that revenue based off of how much attributed revenue that you're generating.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So then can we go back to that unified model aspect of things? Because that's, for me, that's a big piece of my job is to understand like the people that I'm driving, it's never linear. Their customer journey is all over the place. They have a bunch of different touch points, across device, cross session, etc. Can you show me what that looks like with like, the underlying infrastructure is in place? How can we ensure that we have like a unified user profile for every customer? And what does that look like when it comes into the data warehouse? And what do those tables look like? I'd love to see that. It probably would give me that color context that I need to understand it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So let me actually hop into the warehouse and showcase what the data looks like. So this is a Snowflake dashboard, and what's interesting with we support all the different warehouses. With Snowflake specifically, we have a streaming loader built with Snowpipe. So all the data that's been orchestrated on your site, on your mobile applications, it gets into Snowflake in truly real time. And at scale, what we've seen is we can get all of that unified data into the warehouse in underneath 3 seconds. So incredibly quick. And that's another big differentiator that is to be mentioned, right? Like a lot of times you need to start to understand how we're driving attribution conversions and the fact that it is being done in real time, especially if you're looking at reporting and analytics on top of your attribution data here. So with the unified model specifically, you can see here, we first build an atomic events table. So this is a raw historic log of all the events users are performing that you've orchestrated. So you can see some of the events here: link clicks, page views, page pings, screen views, the fact that maybe a mobile application went into the foreground. So all of these are events, and you can see all the associated data with those events, the time we're capturing those events. More importantly, the user identifying information that's leading to those events being performed. So user IDs, user IP address, all the first party cookies that I mentioned before, especially the server set cookie, which again lasts up to 400 days and allows us to stitch anonymous user data across 400 days, even if the user is not identifying themselves.
And that's different than other providers, right? So this is tracking it for 400 days. What typically do you get from a tracking perspective for other providers?
So if the provider is not a first-party tracking solution like Snowplow is, and that tends to be the case for most providers, and it's a really huge differentiator. You're only being able to track anonymous users for up to 7 days for the most part.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And after 7 days, they get assigned a new cookie, and they get recorded as a duplicate user. And it's a ton of work to start to understand how do you combine those duplicate user profiles together to create a single customer user profile.
Yeah, so customers that have, like even for us, like our cycles of somebody like learning about us and coming into the funnel, it's much longer than 7 days. So, really there's a lot of duplicates in the data and things of that nature when you're looking at attribution. Is that what I'm gathering?
Yeah, I mean, if you're using a solution like Google Analytics, you have a lot of duplicates in the warehouse, or you have just generic data loss because it takes a while for. Another thing to really realize is that that real time is really important too. Google Analytics, sometimes it takes about 24 hours plus to get data into their warehouse, which is BigQuery, which they lock you into. And that's issue number one. And issue number two is really their third-party tracking solution, and it leads to, as you said, duplicate user issues. And both of those things are what Snowplow is solving for here in the attribution context as well.
And you can determine all the different types of events that you want to track, and it's not just kind of your basics from Google Analytics, your clicks or page views, things like that. We can do page scroll depth, we can do video length of watching, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly, not only is our custom event tracking help to do that, but also our modeling as well. So if I scroll down, you can see things like our DPT views table. So on a per page view, we go ahead and say within that specific page that the user visited, this is what their engagement looks like, right? So this is pre-computed for in the warehouse. So this is their total engagement time within that page. This is horizontally how far they're scrolling, vertically how far they're scrolling, and also all the sort of UTM parameter info, right? A lot of times to be able to understand what's leading a user to a web page or mobile page and having them interact. Not only do we have the interaction data, but what led them to that site, right? What marketing medium, marketing source, marketing content, campaign, click IDs, etc., actually drove the user to that site. And this is really the start of attribution. It's taking the UTM parameters from the query that's landing them on the site and making sense of that and linking those together.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Really great. Thank you. So when you have all this data, now, I know I have, the data team here at Snowplow helps take all this data for me and bring it into like attribution models that I can just kind of look at nicely. Unfortunately, I don't do the hard work, all the hard work, and Snowplow and the data team do that for me. So can you explain to me, like, what does the marketing attribution table look like? And, how does the data we collect through Snowplow differ from like the data provided by like those out of the box platforms? Maybe you can just kind of show what that data looks like when it comes in and how they're different.
Yeah, of course. So really, again, starts off with this unified views table. So we take on a per page view, we take this marketing data here, like what landed the user onto the page. and all the various other details that you see here. And we then go ahead and build these attribution tables. So one of the first one is attributed campaign. So you can see all the different conversions listed out here, whether a user signed up or booked a demo or downloaded a white paper, whatever it is that you're assigning as a conversion event is going to be listed out here as these conversion events happen. And then you can see any revenue associated with that conversion event. And then what is the pathway the user took to convert, right? So again, a lot of times users are clicking into multiple campaigns, multiple advertisements and channels, and visiting to your site before they ultimately convert. So we won't just say, hey, like this is the only channel that influence or only campaign that influence conversion. We'll actually give you the string of the exact pathway the user took on a per event basis before they converted. And then we'll take that pathway and say, based off of your attribution model, ultimately this is the campaign, the channel, the advertisement that's getting the full attribution credit. If you're using a model like Last Touch or First Touch, that exclusively gives 100% credit to a specific campaign. But again, this differs based off of, again, your attribution model. Like you can apply a model that gives multiple campaigns and sources of credit as opposed to one.
Yeah, I know one thing that we're doing, on our side is we have like all the different touch points, right? But from my perspective, like I want to understand what are the touch points before somebody becomes like a marketing qualified lead, like an MQL in our funnel. And then I want to understand the touch points that they have between like the marketing qualified stage and like an opportunity stage. Like, so what are all the touch points that they're having between there? And then ultimately, like, what are the touch points like our customers are having after the fact, to reduce churn or make sure that they're happy or make sure that the information that they need to progress and grow. So it's really cool to see like how the underlying data comes in because, I'm seeing a nice dashboard of like, okay, here's my campaign in Salesforce, here are all the touch points that somebody's having before they become an MQL. And so then I can optimize my spend as well. So this is really cool. I appreciate this. So, as I'm looking through this, I have tons more questions, but, I really appreciate you showing this underlying like infrastructure to us today. I know the audience like appreciates it. So I'm going to wrap up here with our talk, and there's more to come. So I'll start off with, talking about how I utilize this data when we have it. We're going to have a white paper that comes out where I talk about, how to funnel this real-time data into your platforms such as like Google search, or if you're using like an ABM platform like a Stack Adapt or something for like ABM advertising. I talk through like the importance of that attribution data and then getting it into those platforms to optimize like your return on ad spend and ROI. So look out for that in the next couple days. And then in addition, we also have a fireside chat coming up with Miles Younger, who's a part of U of Digital. And we're going to be talking about that zero party data and why it's so important to be like customer centric and looking at like that underlying data that you're getting from your customers to ultimately like, help your future conversions and what ultimately will drive, business in the future. So really looking forward to that. Feel free to scan and register for that session and join us then. Once again, really appreciate everybody joining us today. Thank you, Mo, for your time. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your week. Thank you all. Have a good one.